Hey, I am Mustafa Sharif. Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I'm looking forward this episode. It's going to be super interesting. Many topics to talk about. We're going to talk about Stipo, we're going to talk about European placemaking network. I have the pleasure to welcome Hans to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome, Hans.
Thank you very much, and wonderful to be here.
My pleasure. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Just had a funny weekend of online birthday celebrations, so we're all adapting, I guess.
Yes,
But
happy
we're trying to
birthday.
make the best of it. Thank you very much.
And how is it going with your work during these days?
Luckily, I feel blessed, because our work is continuing mostly, and I, of course, see a lot of people around me and in the world who cannot continue the work. So that is the first thing to be really, really thankful for. We're working a lot with municipalities, communities who want to continue working on the projects that we've started. Of course, you need to be more creative nowadays to still have the same type of co-creation and to hear as many voices and not just restrict yourselves to the online networks that you have already. We find it super important to be very diverse in the way we organize our co-creation with communities, and so that's where you need to be more creative nowadays.
And how is it going when you're doing it digitally? Is it the same feeling?
No, no, of course not. No, no. I genuinely, and I think a lot of us prefer to meet people in person. However, we've seen that now, of course, everybody kind of understands and accepts the fact that it is like this, and it does generate a new creativity as well. So, for instance, we're working in a neighborhood in Utrecht, which is one of the lower income neighborhoods and also one of the least healthy neighborhoods in Utrecht. And this is what we want to help improve in combination with the green infrastructure of the neighborhood, by involving and including the different groups who are living there and more into the public space. And well, normally we would have placed our caravan in the neighborhood and slept there, because then you have the experience that you will see a whole different type of people coming to you than when you would organize something in a formal room of the city. So we cannot do that right now. But for instance, we've shifted to distributing door-to-door information, things that children can, cut out things put on the map. But we're also had the whole neighborhood designed in Minecraft as well. So we're having
Wow.
the boys and girls from the neighborhoods play on Minecraft and redesign their own environment in a digital way. And then we've included questions for them to include their parents doing so. So hopefully, you need to be creative like this as well, I guess.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. I guess also there are many things to learn, especially to use post-corona. So it's a good moment to be creative and explore different methods.
Yeah, and if anything, people are more and more aware, of course, that it's so important to have social networks in your own neighborhood. And I think, we're involved in public space and placemaking. You can read these as very physical things to do, changing the physical environment. But maybe the most important aspect of placemaking, I think, is building the social networks and building the social capital. And everybody more than ever realizes how important it is that if you are now, even you may not even have corona, but you may just develop a flu. You're not allowed to go to the supermarket now. You need to rely on your neighbor to do the shopping for you. So it's really down to the social neighborhood networks right now.
Well, Hans, you're our storyteller for this episode. So how would you like to introduce yourself? And please tell us, what are you passionate about?
By profession and training, I'm a planner, but I would say I just love people and I love cities. I love the public qualities of cities, and I love to work on the public qualities of cities. Um, Probably something to do with my childhood trauma. When I was 6 years old, my parents abducted me to a small town move there, and I was longing back to the big city since. Um, uh, I like the way cities challenge you as a person, and the interaction, the diversity of cities. Yeah, this is what I've tried to make my work of, and trying to help recreate cities in a way that it's done with all the voices at the table, and it's done in a very in the most sustainable way possible.
So already when you were a child, you fall in love with this human scale, the multi-layer city, public spaces.
I don't think when I was 6 years old I had those words, but I probably felt it. I probably felt that I loved, being among people, and I had that feeling much less in a smaller town, to be honest. So, but that's just very strictly personal, because I think you can do placemaking in small villages as well, and it's probably more important anywhere else. So, but yeah, I was always very involved, and I like to not just work for the sake of working. I like to hopefully contribute something meaningful, and do that with a lot of people like-minded as well.
Yes, and how was when you started the Stipo? What was the background, and when did you started it?
Yeah, I'm one of the founding partners. Well, we already started back in the 80s, and if you right now look a little bit at what was built in the 80s, in the Netherlands, in Europe, throughout the world, actually, maybe you can understand that we got really, really angry about the poor quality being provided back then, and we felt we needed to provide an alternative. Um, some of the neighborhoods developed in the 80s were called sustainable because the Club of Rome had just come out with their first reports that we are running out of resources on this planet, um, which led to the first experiments, which was very good. I mean, they were using rainwater to flush the toilets with and avoiding the use of tropical hardwood, which was a very noble thing to do. But then if you look at those neighborhoods, they were just terrible as hell. And we thought this is not going to be sustainable because we're probably going to be tearing them down 30, 40 years from now. And we want to help create areas that the users are happy with, not only right after delivery, but also hopefully 50, 100, 200, 300 years from now, because that's true sustainability in our view. So we wanted to find out what is this broader notion of sustainability really, and started researching the characteristics of neighborhoods and cities, districts that have proven to be long-lasting through the decades, through the centuries even, and use that as a fundament for our thinking on how to redevelop areas and cities.
Back in the 80s, when you were telling, okay, we want to create sustainable neighborhoods, sustainable cities, how was the reaction? Because now it's something obvious, okay, sustainable smart city, but back in days, I believe it was hard to tell someone human scale, sustainable city.
Yeah, we had to fight for it more back then, I think. Yeah, you kind of presumed right now that it would be easier now. There is more awareness, I would say, of human scale, of quality of public space, etc., etc. It's more in the debates nowadays. But if you look at the majority of what's being built in the world, we're still very much losing the battle. And maybe even more so than in the 80s, because the scale of development has gone up, the industrialization of development has gone up, the international flows of capital have gone up. So the mechanisms working against human skill have increased since the 80s as well. So we need to work harder than ever, I think, with all of us. We need all of us in this
Yes, of course.
to make truly sustainable cities, and not just do one thing about sustainability. You know, we're always running behind that one thing that is, right now it's circular cities. You know, we're devoting all our energy into that, which is very noble again, but we should really do this from a much broader perspective of the social sustainability of the quality of cities, the soul of the place, the quality of public space, the ownership, the co-ownership, the co-creation, etc.
And what is your reflection about that? Sometimes projects focusing on one aspect of the, let's say, just on the ecological aspect or some of them of the social. Do you believe we should really focus on one aspect or we should always think of the three sustainability aspect, economical, ecological, and social?
Yep, every project is unique and has its own challenges, but we always try to be involved in projects in a very integrated way. Which is also why in our team we have a team that is, I'm an urban planner. We have several other urban planners, but we also have a sociologist, a psychologist, even anthropologist, people with more of an economic background. We have people with a heritage background, urban designers. So a lot of the elements that you need to make a complete city. And no, I think we actively try to avoid just narrow it down to a single focus, because the city cannot be narrowed down to a single focus, because the cities are complex, and we should rather embrace that complexity to its full extent than to think that we can just take out one aspect of them.
Yeah. How is it the journey that you're as an urban planner, but in the same group you work with different professions on the same project?
It's, we love it, because the more complex it gets, the more we like it, actually. But you kind of have to have that attitude, because it means that the whole project and the program, or how do you want to call it, becomes totally unpredictable. But we like unpredictable. We like surprises. We like to have outcomes that we would have never thought that would be working on. So we like to set up networks and programs in a way that they will bring a lot of unexpected surprises along the way. I think that's the whole spirit of tactical urbanism, of placemaking, of being more iterative, of a more organic approach. The more people you work with, the higher your quality of ideas will be. Because you will just, we know from creativity theory that creative people don't necessarily have better ideas, have more ideas.
Yeah.
And if you apply that to an urban planning process, you need to make sure you have a lot of ideas, and then you select the winning ideas from them. You don't go for the average of them, you select the winning ideas of them. I think that's the good process of urban development, really.
Yes, I agree with you, especially as an urban planner and working with city development, you need to have this wide horizon to see what's going on and what are the different interests and aspects. You started a Placemaking Europe. Is it something related to Placemaking X network, or there are two different things?
Yeah, no, they're like brothers and sisters, I would say, or very related. I think for 10 years now, already since we started our city at eye level program about 12 years ago, we've been part of the global advocacy for this, for more human scale in our cities. And I think placemaking is a very important element of it. There's a lot of things I really, really love about the body of knowledge that has been developed for placemaking over the past 40 years and is still under development, right? Because we're still very much learning how to do this. There are some crucial elements that are really different from the way things were done traditionally, and which are really crucial and vital, I think, for this idea of a true sustainable development. And a part of that is that we've always worked together with Project for Public Spaces, and then later Project for Public Spaces is now maybe focusing a bit more on their consultancy work and on the US. And the international advocacy is done more by Placemaking X that came out of it. So we work together with them, and I think in a certain way, Placemaking X is an example for Placemaking Europe. Placemaking Europe is an example for Placemaking X, similar to how we're learning from all the other regional networks as well.
Yes,
And
and
actually,
you,
personally, I'm now also on the interim board of Placemaking X to bring it to the next phase.
yes, and what is the next phase? Do you have any plans for the or vision? The next step,
Uh, for Placemaking Europe or for Placemaking X?
Placemaking Europe.
For Placemaking Europe, I think we've grown more or less organically and through the use of Facebook, social media, and of course our conferences, to a very active network of 2,800 people by now, all throughout Europe, and it's really wonderful. If you post something now on the Facebook group, you'll get 20 answers from all corners of Europe and other parts of the world by the end of the week. So it's a really highly active network where people dare to ask and learn from each other. But we feel that we need to scale up more. We need to professionalize the organization because we rely too much on the voluntary hours right now. And we all feel that we want to take the step to make placemaking more part of the system and drive more towards systemic change. And by that I mean, for instance, if you look at the area development process, then right now very often placemaking is something considered you should do as something you should do at the beginning or the end of the process. Whereas we think it should be part of the entire process, because the way you design your buildings, the way you design your streets, very much determine the amount of human skill you will get. And this is not something that you should just only repair with doing some placemaking afterwards if things have gone bad, if you know what I mean. You want to be at the heart of the process. So
Yes, exactly.
another way is that we feel that more and more cities are learning how to, a lot of cities have systems for the public spaces that mean that they're doing the same thing everywhere, and they're standardizing because it's more efficient, which is understandable because they need to be cost efficient. Of course, they
Yes,
work with
yes,
public money, but placemaking and working with communities means making exceptions to the rules. So one of the big questions is how can you open up these top-down systems for tapping into the bottom-up energy in your city, and for those two to work together in a productive way, which is what we call creative bureaucracy, which is again something we're working on with Placemaking Europe very much. And I think, for instance, we're also noticing that the placemaking initiatives are scaling up, and they're getting to a point sometimes where they need a different financial infrastructure. So I think we need to start building and providing a different financial infrastructure, which is something we are doing in our own practice in Utrecht right now, in the province of Utrecht, by having a placemaking investment fund. But we think that such a fund should actually grow to a more national and possibly even a European funding structure for placemaking initiatives.
yeah. Because I wanted to ask you, you just mentioned that city is trying to, how to say, let's say, not really copy the different project, but try to make it cost efficient. So does it mean placemaking cost a lot?
If you look at it from a point of view of the system world, where everything is repetitive and repeated and standardized as much as possible, then you might say it costs a lot. So from coming from that perspective, yes. If you look at the social values, if you look at the possible values that lie in placemaking, both the more indirect and the more direct values as well. So we can even talk about actual property value. I think the benefits greatly outweigh the relatively small investments that you need to make for placemaking. And I think we're also seeing this in the debate about how placemaking is sometimes causing gentrification, because that means a lot of value is created, and then the people who originally started the process are being driven from the success. So we need new systems to tap into those mechanisms and to reinvest some of those profits back into the community for placemaking in a more sustainable way.
Yeah. But who should be the responsible for placemaking? Is it the municipality, the placemakers? I mean, I believe it's a collaboration, but there should be someone responsible for this. Or what do you think?
I think the way our thinking goes is that basically anybody can and should be a placemaking. Whether you're working for a city government, whether you're working for a real estate developer, whether you're working for a design company, or whether you're a bottom-up initiative from the neighborhood. And we don't believe that cities can be built in a top-down way solely, or they can, but they tend to be very clinical and boring and uninviting and not very sustainable as well. We don't think either that you can build a city entirely from a bottom-up idea, because then you miss the long-term strategic impact that you also need in cities. You need these two worlds to work together, and the same goes for placemaking. So I would say you should be able to find placemakers inside municipal organizations, inside real estate developer corporations, and inside bottom-up initiatives. And I think the real change happens when they start working together.
Yes, exactly. The magic happen when people meet and collaborate.
Yeah, so it's hard to say who should be responsible, because if you're talking about systemic change, which I think we are talking about here, then you need everybody on board, and you need the early innovators in each of these elements, and then also in the universities, and in educating the new generations of people working on cities, etc., etc.
Yeah. So how are you going to bring everybody to placemaking week? When is it?
Yeah, well, right now that's a bit tough to say, of course. We're working towards 2021 right now. We're very dependent, of course, on what the restrictions will be like. We're setting up ideas for digital exchange. We're setting up an idea for a post-COVID city right now. With there's a group of people within Placemaking Europe taking an initiative for this now. We're setting up a festival and hopefully a conference for informal play. So a lot underway, but we're constantly, like everybody, thinking in two scenarios. What if we can do it live, and what if we need to do the digital need to do it the digital way? Luckily, we have invested a lot in the previous years to actually meet people within Europe, within the world, connecting with the Asian placemakers, with the Australian placemakers, with the networks from Africa and Latin America, the placemaking US and Canada. And that is the capital that we can now build on, that we can now use to keep an open mind, to not just be only focused on your own home in your own neighborhood, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. And also you have different annual meetings like the city at eye levels and so on.
We've always wanted to be part of the global advocacy as well. And we've always invested in that. So we are a social enterprise. We do actual projects, consultancy projects, but then we reinvest that into these moments of sharing. And before we may have done a conference or a book, and now it's more the online version. So again, you need to be creative, and that's what we want to do.
Yes, yes. And Hans, in this podcast, together with my guest, I explore what is a smart city. And I'm really interested and I would love to hear from you. How do you define a smart city?
For me, a smart city is a city that taps into the wisdom of the city itself, that taps into the creativity of the city itself, that provides frameworks for bottom up and top down to work together, that aims at this idea of self organization. And self organization very often is misread as, okay, we can do nothing because the city is going to self organize. That's not how it works. It requires a very active attitude from the side of the city council. Um, but it doesn't mean that you're the sole responsible group of people who are coming up with what should be in the agenda, and then pushing the implementation as well. It means that you're co-creating this. It means that you're setting up systems for others to join. And I guess for every challenge there is in the city, somebody in your city will have a part of the solution. So rather than coming up with the solutions yourselves, or rather than tapping into large corporates to impose those solutions, because that's very often, of course, what the smart city becomes, a kind of a vehicle for large international corporates to take over parts of the public responsibility and then earn a lot of money on it. And I'm not against technique at all. And I think we need a lot of those techniques as well. We need those companies as well. We make use of them as well, of course. But I really think a genuinely smart city is a city that taps into the knowledge of its citizens, and is aimed at combining the energy of citizens, providing new frameworks for activating citizens, for connecting initiatives from the city, and then combining bottom up and top down mechanisms. By the way, I'm talking about citizens, which is not entirely right, because I think it's more about all the stakeholders. I think there's a lot of creativity among real estate developers as well. And there's a lot of creativity among universities, among planning departments, among housing corporations, the more institutional organizations as well. So probably we should be talking about a whole range of stakeholders that you need to tap into, and that you need to address all the challenges in our cities, which are there are immense challenges in our cities right now.
So for you, a smart city is more about this smart people, not smart devices and machines.
Definitely, yeah.
And what are the challenges that we are facing in order to become a smart city?
It's like turning an oil tanker, I feel. A lot of the, well, I don't know, context do you want to talk about? It makes a great difference, of course, depending region to region, or even regions within Europe or outside Europe. So we work in Asia as well. We work, in other parts of the world as well. But if we're focusing now on Europe, as an example, I think a lot of the governments in the post-war decade were taking care of everything more or less, right? And then, of course, there's a big difference between Central and East Europe and West and South Europe again. And it's hard to generalize, but I guess there was this idea of the welfare state, and this also coincided with for the relative European terms with fast growth. And somehow I think there's a relationship between fast growth in terms of quantity and the strong role of the government sector. So if you're used to doing that for the past 40 or 50 years, you're not going to change that system just in one day or in 1 year. That needs time as well. And with everything we do, we find out that it's in everything. It's in the culture, it's in the legal frameworks, it's in the way we distribute funding, distribute our taxes, etc., etc. So if you're starting to think about systemic change, then you find out at some point you need to address all those elements. So that's the challenge, really. And then, of course, there's very urgent needs in our cities. There's the very urgent need to address the global capital flowing into our cities, and probably even more so now. I mean, what's happening under Corona? I think cities have a big opportunities and are facing a big threat at the same time as well, because who are going to benefit most from any crisis are the stakeholders with the deepest pockets. So we will see that a lot of the local formulas will find it very hard to survive in the coming years, already now, and the cities run the risk that for instance, those properties will be bought up by large international conglomerates. So there is a big opportunity for cities now to come up with a vision, to start organizing the networks, to start organizing different investment mechanisms, because we already felt in Europe we needed to reinvent the significance of the city centers. They were already overrun, over tourism. We were facing with segregation, etc., etc. So actually, there is a big opportunity to reinvent those ideas now. But if you don't do that, then there is the big threat that things will happen for you, and then they will probably not happen in the way that you want them to go.
Yes, exactly. Hans, what do you see? Are we going toward a smart city? You have so many valuable years of experience. Do you see cities in Europe are developing toward the smart city as the one you defined?
Well, in the growth of networks like Placemaking Europe, and I think it's nice to point out that Placemaking Europe is not just bottom-up initiatives. It's a lot of people working for city councils, for instance, who want to change from the inside out. It's a lot of more and more people. We partner up with the Urban Land Institute, who are the network for the real estate sector. A lot of these people inside the real estate sector are also actively looking for change, and not just the people on the ground, but also the CEOs. So yeah, there is more and more awareness and opportunity for this, I would say. But we have to be aware of the mechanisms working against us at the same time.
Yes.
For instance, there's more and more, the cost of labor is more and more expensive. So more and more facades are being prefabricated, to mention something super practical, but it leads to the situation where we fabricate our facades not on the spot, but we fabricate them somewhere in a factory and then glue them to the structure on the spot. And it leads to all these facades more or less being the same everywhere in the latest newly built projects, rather than tapping into the local circumstances, creating human scale, fine grain, variety, and etc. So we need to be
Yeah,
aware that these processes are going on.
exactly. So, what are the challenges that Stipo is facing now?
Yeah, if you look at what we find important, I think it's a lot. Yeah, right. Because if you have a big passion for cities, then you don't want to restrict yourself to just one thing. One of the big themes we are working on is what we call place-led development. is to try to integrate this idea of city development and placemaking, and not see them as two separate things, but to integrate the values and to really develop areas, do area transformation, area development from the point of view of human skill, social life, interaction between people, etc., etc. And the city at eye level, right? So that is one of the big themes that we are working on. Another one, of course, is to include the users and the residents in the energy transition that we are going through. We see a lot of top-down ideas on how to make these changes, and we see a lot of technology available, thankfully, but there's a big gap in actually reaching the local people who are on the ground to start making the change from the inside out, and to make it to get to a shared sense of ownership and to tap into the energy and the creativity of the people in the neighborhoods as well. One of the big themes, of course, of our time is how to be more inclusive in everything we do, and how to prevent this gentrification tendency that there is in cities, and the people, the vulnerable people, the vulnerable function being pushed out of our cities. So in a lot of the areas that we're working on, we're trying to create a ground floor area management model that will allow for more affordable ground floor uses for the startups from the neighborhood, the local formulas, the creatives, the social amenities, the maker spaces, etc. You know, the type of functions that otherwise would be driven out of the city, and these are the more practical ways to build a more inclusive city, I think. For instance, another example is we see there's a lot of vacuum now between the challenges that our cities are facing and what the institutional partners can do. So we this kind of void in this vacuum. There's this new initiative coming up, which we call the public developer. It's not a private developer that is only in it for the maximizing profit. And that is, of course, a cliche, because more and more private developers, luckily, are looking more at the public side of things as well. But the public developer wants to develop the public qualities of the city based on a financial model. But then a financial model that is a more fair model, maybe. So I think it's very important for cities to grow that sector. And in order to grow that sector, you need to make them networked, and you need to provide them with a new financial infrastructure. Because when they knock on the door of a bank for a loan, when they have found a financial model, very often they're denied, or they're given only loans under too severe circumstances. So this is why I think it would be very valuable to have a new financial investment infrastructure on a European scale, even such as a placemaking fund or a city maker fund.
Yes, so many challenges, Hans.
And that's just the beginning of it.
We need the whole new season just to talk about the challenges, right? I'm super inspired. Thank you so much for giving your time for the podcast, Hans.
Very, very happy to be a part of this, and yeah, we can do more specials if you want.
Yes, of course. So, what is the next step for you, Hans?
Well, actually, right now we're in the process of developing a new city at eye level book for Asia with the Asian network, because the Asian network really liked the city at eye level principles, but very righteously they said, we're kind of fed up with getting all the Western examples constantly. We have our own examples by now.
Makes sense.
So we partnered up with Think City in Kuala Lumpur, and they, together with them and with a lot of other partners like iDiscovery, Tempatico right now, we're developing this new book called The City at Eye Level Asia with 80 cases from Asian countries. And it really shows that within their own context, they are indeed finding complete new answers in terms of the climate, of course, which is different, the culture that is different, the pace of and the scale of development that are different. So that is super exciting to be working on right now.
And it's super interesting also for us in Europe to read this book as well, to see what's happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons we can take both ways, I think. And I think in the globalized world, we'll see more and more of the development mechanisms being taking place there now, coming to Europe as well, coming to Africa, etc. So it's good to have this open eye for global learning while acting locally, which is really what we are interested in. We want to devote 25% of our time abroad and 75% within the communities locally, of course, because that's where we can have the sustainable impact.
Wonderful. Hans, thank you so much. And how would you like to summarize what we talked about and your reflection and three takeaway messages to all the people that listening to you?
Oh dear. I was hoping you would help me there. Keep aiming for the human scale. Think of the most vulnerable people in your city and be practical about the way you can change the systems towards that.
Wonderful. And three hashtags for the episode.
Hashtag city at eye level. Hashtag placemaking X. Hashtag placemaking Europe.
Wow, I think you're the fastest one giving hashtags.
And yeah, maybe we can talk about that another time. But we have this whole book and program, of course, about how to develop the city with and for children, called the City at Eye Level for
Of course.
Kids, our future generations. So they maybe are the most important ones we can think of.
Yes, wonderful. And I will give a lecture actually about cities for children in the Royal Institute of Technology, and I will use this book as a reading material. So I found it super wonderful. And again, thank you so much. It's a great book.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Hans, and hopefully see you in the future in one more interesting episode.
Thank you, Mustafa. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. Please follow the Instagram account and subscribe the YouTube channel for live talks. If you have any story that makes our city smarter, please contact me. And this podcast is produced in collaboration with Landskapslaget, consultant company working with landscape architecture and urban planning and design in Stockholm. Well, I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.